So, market equilibrium. So equilibrium is where the quantity demanded by all the consumers at a particular price is just equal to the quantity firms want to supply. If there's an excess demand, if at that price the total demand is greater than the supply, that's excess demand, that would act as a signal to producers that there's an opportunity to make money by selling some more. In particular, by raising price as well. The signal. And if there's an excess supply, if producers find they can't sell all their goods, it acts as a signal to lower the price. Now this may not cross culturally, but a good example in England would be go into a supermarket in the early evening and they will be cutting the price of bread. Because of course bread is fairly time limited. Some breads are fairly time limited. And if they find they've still got a lot of bread on the shelf and it's getting later in the evening, they anticipate they're going to have to throw it away. So that's a situation of excess supply, too much bread. So then they lower the price.
Too much bread, or the consumers are waiting for the...
Well, of course, consumers become quite educated. And this is why, for selling bread, we are happy to leave it to the market. Some consumers, I have to say myself included sometimes, will time our arrival, or will try and time our arrival, to capture the bread at the lower price. Because there's no guarantee how often do you do that and there's no bread left. So it's a tricky decision. But my point here is the unsold bread is acting as a signal. Similarly, if you're selling something and there's a queue of people outside trying to wait to purchase it, or a waiting list for something, that's a signal of excess demand. Okay. Price will rise, we predict, when there's excess demand, and will fall when there's excess supply. So now these are just stylized curves, demand-supply curve. They don't have to be exactly this shape. It's just if you're drawing things in PowerPoint, it's a lot easier to go with the curves that are readily available. But they have that feature, demand curve, higher, downward sloping to the left, supply curve upward sloping to the right. So that would be a situation of equilibrium. If the price was P star, the quantity demanded would equal the quantity supplied. If, on the other hand, we found ourselves at price P1, in this market, the quantity demanded would be quite a lot less than the quantity that people want to supply, and so we have excess supply. This could be the bread on the shelves in the early evening. And, well, we then expect producers might lower price, because as they lower price, demand will increase. And we begin to eliminate the excess supply. Similarly, if we were down in this situation, if the price happened to be P2 and we had these supply and demand curves, there'd be an excess of demand. This is the queue, the waiting list perhaps. I wonder if there's a waiting list for the iPhone 8. Might be, I'm not sure. We can think of that. We have waiting lists for kidney transplants, for example. But not a great example because we don't tend to use prices to allocate these things. Okay, so this is how a market works. And if we've got excess supply, if we've got excess demand, we expect the signal that people get will help us move back towards the equilibrium, where quantity demanded equals quantity supplied. Right, now these equilibrium, this sort of point here, they are what we call Pareto optimal or Pareto efficient. Jargon doesn't matter. The meaning is this: If we're in this position, this market equilibrium, it's impossible to make one person better off without making someone worse off. That's what we mean by Pareto efficient. Impossible to make one person better off without making someone worse off. And that seems, or that's argued, of course it's an ethical, judgmental issue, to be a good thing. If you're in a position where you can't make anyone better off without someone becoming worse off, you can see how in some sense that's quite a good position. Much better than being in a position where by making this change we could make someone better off without anyone being worse off. Yes, I have to introduce another concept. Marginal rate of substitution. Now this, which gets abbreviated to MRS, this is the rate at which an individual is willing to give up one good in order to get units of another good. So imagine you've got two things that you value, so they're good things for you to have. The marginal rate of substitution tells us if you're going to give up a unit of one of the things you value, how much of the other one, what increase would you require of the other one? I've got a simple example coming up which I hope will get the idea across. Marginal rate of transformation, abbreviated MRT, measures the rate at which the economy is able to produce less of one thing and with the resources released, more of something else. So the MRT, marginal rate of transformation, is telling us about how the economy functions in terms of being able to combine inputs to produce outputs. The MRS, marginal rate of substitution, is about people's preferences, people's values. Marginal rate of transformation is about the ability of the economy to produce different combinations of goods or services. Right, suppose the marginal rate of substitution is not equal to marginal rate of transformation. The two things are not equal. Now it's going to get very easy now. You may get hungry, but at least this part should be an easier part of the lecture. That's an apple. That may be obvious. What may be less obvious here is what this is. It's chocolate, wrapped up in gold paper. I think the gold paper is incidental and the heart shape is incidental. Although there's a subliminal thing about loving chocolate, I think. Right, suppose that this represents the marginal rate of substitution of the consumer. So suppose for the individual, the marginal rate of substitution is equal to 1. That means if they were going to give up an apple, eat one less apple, they would need to be compensated with one more chocolate. Now, the marginal rate of substitution doesn't have to be 1. For some people, it could be 10. If I'm going to give up an apple, lovely green crisp apple, I need 10 chocolates to compensate me. For some people, it could be 0.1. I'll give up an apple as long as you give me, or I'll give up 10 apples as long as you give me 1 chocolate. So that's to do with people's preferences. I'm just to keep our example simple, let's assume it's equal to 1. So marginal rate of substitution here, 1 for 1. People are willing to give up an apple if you can compensate them with 1 chocolate. Let's suppose, however, the marginal rate of transformation is equal to 2. And by that we mean society could produce 2 additional chocolates by giving up or cutting back production of apples by 1. So the marginal rate of transformation, 2 for 1. Now, this situation would not be optimal in the sense that it can be improved on. We can do better than this. How do we do better than this? We produce fewer apples. Because every apple less we produce, I need a chocolate to compensate someone who's losing their apple. But according to this, my economy is such, the technology, the inputs available, knowledge, etc., is such that the resources freed in producing apples allow me, for each less apple I produce, to produce 2 chocolates. But I only have to compensate the person with 1 chocolate. So, just the opposite of our dead weight loss, we've got an additional chocolate as if from nowhere. And that, in more technical terms, is simply because the marginal rate of substitution is not equal to the marginal rate of transformation. There's the opportunity to do better. And another way of doing it, again, I don't know if it helps, but if it does, quantity of chocolates on the vertical, and quantity of apples on the horizontal. This curve here, we would call so much jargon, production possibility frontier. It's showing the ability of the economy to produce combinations of different goods. In this case, apples and chocolates. So this economy, given our knowledge, given our available inputs, resources, we could produce all of these combinations of chocolates and apples, or anything below it. What we can't do, we can't produce up here. Up here, the combination of apples and chocolate, we don't have enough resources to produce up here. So we can produce here. Well, the marginal rate of transformation in the economy is given by the slope of this frontier. Because the slope is showing, as we produce less chocolate, how much more apples we get. So it's a marginal rate of transformation. Similarly, we call it a social welfare frontier. We can imagine a curve that is showing what people value, the different combinations of chocolate and apple, that they are of equal value to them. And so there's lots of these curves. We can imagine other curves down here, where society is less well off, they're on a lower social welfare frontier, and we can imagine other curves higher up. But the point is, given our technology, given our available resources, the social welfare frontier highest one we can get to is this one. And that point here, we're just able to reach this higher frontier. If you imagine the next one up, it's outside of our production possibilities. We can't get there. You can imagine ones down here. Well, we can achieve that, but why do that? Why not do more? Why not achieve something better for our society? And so we achieve it at the point of tangency between the 2 curves, and of course that point, well, maybe not of course, where the slope of the production possibility frontier is equal to the slope of the social welfare frontier, the marginal rate of transformation is equal to the marginal rate of substitution. And we can't do any better. Doesn't matter how we consider more chocolate or less apple, we can't do better than that. Now, I'll be very brief on this bit. Given the assumptions that we make about firms being price takers, maximizing profits, given assumptions about consumers being well enough informed so they know when they've encountered the lowest possible price, etc., then a competitive market will get you to that point. It will, and I'm not going to demonstrate this because it would take too long, it will set prices such that you end up here. You end up in your best possible place. And that is why it's allocatively efficient. That's why economists love markets. Because if all these assumptions are fulfilled, leave it to the market. Markets should get you to this best of all place.